Chapter 1. The Billion-Dollar Contract Between Two Strangers. New York, headquarters of Westwood Enterprises. The Westwood Enterprises building towered over Manhattan, a symbol of a financial empire that had thrived for over half a century. Billion-dollar deals were decided here, partnerships that could shift the landscape of the global economy. And today, one such deal was about to take place. In the corporation's main conference room, a long row of executives, lawyers, and senior advisors sat on either side of a grand walnut conference table. Large screens displayed the contract terms between Westwood Enterprises and Carter Tech. Two men sat at opposite ends of the table. Gabriel Westwood, chairman and CEO of Westwood Enterprises, was a man who carried the aura of power even at the age of 60. His silver-streaked hair was neatly combed, and his sharp black suit only amplified his commanding presence. He was not just a seasoned tycoon, but also a legend in the financial world. Facing him was Daniel Carter, CEO of Carter Tech, a rising technology powerhouse. At just 30, Daniel had achieved what few could, transforming Carter Tech into one of the leading firms in fintech. He exuded a quiet but razor-sharp confidence, his deep-set eyes reflecting the determination of a man who never accepted failure. Neither of them knew that this was more than just a business meeting. They were father and son, separated for 30 years. But today, fate had arranged for them to meet again, unaware of the blood ties between them. Gabriel extended his hand, a customary gesture between powerful men. Daniel responded in kind. Their hands met. At that moment, a strange feeling surged through both of them. It wasn't just the usual handshake between business partners. There was something inexplicably familiar. "A pleasure to work with you, Mr. Westwood," Daniel said, his tone steady yet commanding. "Likewise, Daniel Carter," Gabriel replied, though a flicker of hesitation crossed his voice. As Gabriel withdrew his hand, the lingering feeling remained. He had shaken hands with hundreds of partners throughout his career, but never had anyone evoke such an uncanny sense of familiarity. Daniel, too, felt something unusual. He had never met Gabriel before, and yet, why did it feel as though something intangible connected them? For a split second, Gabriel's gaze lingered on Daniel's face, the sharp jawline, the depth in his eyes. They triggered something in his memory, but he couldn't place it. The moment passed when one of Gabriel's assistants broke the silence with an energetic voice. "If there are no further changes, we can proceed with the signing." Daniel nodded, flipping through the contract once more. Everything was in place. Gabriel put pen to paper, each stroke carrying the decisiveness of a man who had controlled everything in his life. The contract was signed. Applause filled the room as executives began exchanging words. Daniel and Gabriel clinked their champagne glasses, but their eyes hadn't fully left each other. Something lingered between them, something neither could explain. No one knew that an invisible bond of blood connected them. They were father and son, separated by fate for 30 years. And destiny was now bringing them back together. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Encounter. Fate's Guiding Hand. Luxury Shopping Center, New York. The dazzling lights reflected off the marble floor, creating an opulent atmosphere frequented by the elite. Renowned fashion brands, lavish jewelry stores, and high-end boutiques catered to the upper class, offering an exclusive shopping experience. That afternoon, Gabriel Westwood, chairman of Westwood Enterprises, was strolling through the shopping center with his wife, Victoria, and their daughter, Isabella. Victoria, dressed in an elegant deep blue designer gown, clung possessively to her husband's arm. Beside them, Isabella, young, beautiful, and effortlessly sophisticated, was admiring a diamond bracelet in an upscale jewelry store. "Dad, does this bracelet suit me?" Isabella held up the sparkling piece. Gabriel nodded with a small smile, but his mind wasn't truly on the shopping trip. On the other side of the shopping center, Clara Carter and her son, Daniel Carter, were also present. Clara walked beside Daniel in a simple yet elegant beige coat. Though she had reached middle age, she still carried a quiet grace and beauty. Daniel, tall and sharply defined, exuded an air of authority even in such an ordinary setting. Shopping wasn't something he enjoyed, but today he wanted to spend time with his mother. "Mom, do you want to buy anything?" Daniel asked as they passed a designer store. Clara shook her head with a gentle smile. "No, I'm just enjoying the walk." They continued forward. Fate had already set the stage for their worlds to collide. It was a bustling weekend afternoon in New York's most luxurious shopping district. Gabriel stood thoughtfully in front of a display case, examining a high-end timepiece, barely paying attention to Victoria's lively chatter. Suddenly, a calm yet authoritative voice spoke from behind him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Westwood." Gabriel frowned slightly and turned around. Standing before him was Daniel Carter, the young and brilliant CEO, his business partner at Westwood Enterprises. Gabriel nodded, his expression composed. "Good afternoon, Daniel." They shook hands, just a formal greeting between two businessmen. But as soon as their hands parted, Gabriel's gaze unintentionally landed on the woman standing behind Daniel. Clara. Time stood still. In that instant, the world blurred into the background. Clara, the woman he had once loved, the woman he had lost, the woman he believed had vanished from his life forever. She was still the same, matured, refined, but distant. Gabriel couldn't take his eyes off her. "Clara." His voice dropped to a whisper, as if he couldn't believe his own eyes. Clara stood frozen, unable to move. The question that stopped time. After a brief moment of shock, Gabriel composed himself. His gaze shifted from Daniel back to Clara. "Is this your son?" The question cut through Clara's mind like a blade. She couldn't answer. Why was he asking that? Why didn't he realize something was amiss? Did he really not know that Daniel was his own son? Clara parted her lips, but no words came out. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. Beside her, Daniel sensed the tension in the air. Frowning, he turned to his mother. "Mom? Do you two know each other?" Clara bit her lip, took a deep breath, and gave a small nod. Not wanting Daniel to press further, she quickly spoke. "Let's go, Daniel." Daniel gave Gabriel a polite nod. "See you again, Mr. Westwood." Then he left with his mother. Gabriel stood still. The past awakens. Gabriel remained in place, watching as Clara and Daniel walked away. An unexpected emptiness filled his chest. Why had she reacted like that? Why couldn't she answer his question directly? Gabriel had always been a man of logic and control, but something about this moment unsettled him. Beside him, Victoria had been watching everything. She noticed the look in her husband's eyes, the unfamiliar emotion reflected in them. "Gabriel, what's going on?" Her voice was sharp, probing. Gabriel didn't answer, but in his mind a realization was forming. "I need to find out about Clara. I need to know why she reacted that way." And this time, he wouldn't walk away like he did 30 years ago. Welcome to Soul Stories. When you hear these words, you are now a cherished part of the Soul Stories family, a place where we share heartfelt tales that touch the soul. We deeply appreciate every follow, every encouraging comment, and all the feedback you provide. It is your support that drives us to improve continuously, bringing you stories that are profound, meaningful, and resonate with emotions. Each story is not just a collection of words. It's a small gift meant to bring a little joy and sentiment amidst the chaos of life. We may not always be able to satisfy everyone, but please share your thoughts and wishes with us so we can create even more complete stories and spread happiness to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. Let's spread love together. Invite your family and friends to join so our community can soon reach 10,000 members. Soul Stories. Stories that touch the soul. Chapter 3. The truth begins to unfold. Gabriel Westwood couldn't shake the image of Clara from the shopping mall. The way she had frozen in shock upon seeing him. The way she had hurriedly pulled Daniel away without a word of explanation. The way his question, "Is this your son?" had rendered her speechless. Something unsettled him. Clara had once been an irreplaceable part of his life. So why had she vanished without a trace after their separation? Where had she gone? How had she lived all these years? Who exactly was Daniel? And why did Gabriel feel such an inexplicable sense of familiarity with him? Unable to leave these questions unanswered, Gabriel immediately ordered an investigation into Clara Carter. 3 days later, a shocking truth. A dossier was placed on Gabriel's desk. His hands were steady as he flipped it open, his sharp eyes scanning each line of information. The first name that stood out to him, Clara Carter, 52 years old, residing in New York. No surprises there. But as his gaze moved to the next line, his grip on the paper tightened. Daniel Carter, 30 years old, CEO of Carter Tech. Clara Carter's only son. Everything aligned perfectly. Clara had left him 30 years ago. 7 months later, Daniel was born. Gabriel's chest constricted. 30 years. 30 years ago, he had let Clara walk out of his life. 30 years later, he had unknowingly come face to face with his own son. The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. He turned the pages, struggling to maintain his composure. According to the report, Clara had never remarried. She had lived in New York for the past 3 decades, raising Daniel alone. No husband, no new family. A strange feeling welled up in Gabriel's heart. Had she really raised their son on her own for 30 years? Did he still have a chance to make amends? A name that caught Gabriel's attention. Reaching the last page of the dossier, a photograph caught his eye. It was a picture of Clara and Daniel, both looking strong and accomplished. But standing beside them was another man, David Sullivan, 55 years old, CEO of Sullivan Consulting. A man with a composed demeanor, sharp but kind eyes. A note accompanied the image. Known as a close friend and longtime business associate of Clara Carter, has maintained a strong connection with the Carter family for years. Gabriel frowned. David Sullivan? A close friend? A trusted confidant? A sudden weight settled in his chest. Had this man replaced him in Clara's life? Had he been the one standing beside her for the past 30 years? Gabriel set the dossier down, his eyes darkening in thought. 30 years ago, he had chosen duty and family expectations over love. 30 years later, did he still have a chance to correct his greatest mistake? Gabriel leaned back in his chair, his eyes tightly shut. Memories, buried for over 30 years, resurfaced with startling clarity. He remembered their wedding day, the way Clara looked in her white gown, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. He remembered 5 years of happiness, waking up beside her, sharing laughter, dreaming about the future. But then, no child came, and everything began to change. His mother, Kimberly Westwood, had warned him, "Gabriel, you can't continue like this. The Westwood family needs an heir. Clara and I are trying." "It's been 5 years, Gabriel. How much longer? A year? 2? Forever? Are you going to let the Westwood lineage end with you?" Her words became an invisible force, tightening around his marriage like a noose. Love was no longer enough to hold them together. One day when Clara walked into the living room, she sensed something was terribly wrong. Gabriel sat there, his expression heavy. "We need to talk." Clara's heart clenched. Gabriel met her eyes, his voice steady but firm. "I think we should get a divorce." Clara couldn't believe what she had just heard. "Because I can't have children?" "It's not your fault, Clara." His voice trembled. "Then why? Tell me why." Gabriel didn't answer, and that was the most painful answer of all. The day Clara left, rain poured relentlessly from the sky. She stood at the door of the mansion, gazing at him one last time, her eyes filled with heartbreak. "You will regret this, Gabriel." Those were her last words before she turned away, taking with her everything they once had. The next morning, the call that changed everything. Gabriel called Clara. The phone rang endlessly, no answer. He called again. This time she picked up. "Gabriel." She spoke his name, but there was no emotion in her voice. "We need to talk," Gabriel said immediately, trying to steady his tone. "There's nothing to talk about, Gabriel." Her voice was calm but cold. "You know the truth now, don't you?" Gabriel froze. She knew he had investigated her. Clara let out a dry, bitter laugh. "If you're expecting a chance to start over, forget it. Clara, let the past rest." "I can't." Gabriel couldn't walk away. "I've already missed 30 years of Daniel's life. I can't pretend this never happened." Clara took a deep breath. "You weren't there when my son was born. You weren't there when he took his first steps. You weren't there when he fell, when he cried, when he needed a father." She paused. Her next words were colder than ever. He doesn't need you now. And then she hung up. Gabriel sat there still holding the phone, his heart unbearably heavy. Clara had shut him out. But he wouldn't give up. No matter how much she refused, he had to find a way to make things right. Not only Gabriel, but also Kimberly Westwood, his mother, had learned the truth. She had once forced her son to abandon Clara, believing that she was unworthy of the Westwood lineage. But now, upon discovering that she had a grandson, her perspective had completely changed. Daniel is a part of the Westwood bloodline. He deserves to be recognized. Unlike 30 years ago this time, Kimberly wanted to claim her grandson. She met with Gabriel, placing her hands firmly on his desk, her voice resolute. Your son must return to the Westwood family. Gabriel looked at his mother, his eyes filled with a deep, aching sorrow. But what if he doesn't want to? What if Clara refuses? Kimberly remained silent for a long moment before exhaling a heavy sigh. We made a mistake once. I don't want us to make another. She paused, then spoke again, her tone softer but no less firm. Let me meet him. I want to give him the inheritance he deserves. Chapter 4. The secret is exposed in Victoria's scheme. Victoria panics upon learning the truth. At the Westwood mansion, in the lavishly decorated living room, Victoria Westwood sat frozen on the plush sofa, her face deathly pale. Before her lay a dossier containing a truth she had never imagined. Daniel Carter, the young man who had just signed a billion-dollar contract with her husband, was Gabriel's biological son. Victoria felt as though her entire world had collapsed. No, this can't be. Her voice trembled as she read through every line of the report. She clenched the file so tightly that her fingers turned white. Only one thought echoed in her mind. If Daniel is acknowledged, Isabella will lose everything. Victoria had spent her entire life securing her daughter's place, ensuring that Isabella would become the rightful heir of the Westwood family. But now, in the blink of an eye, everything could be ripped away. Daniel Carter, a stranger, was about to take everything she had fought for. The mere thought of Gabriel choosing Daniel as his successor sent a wave of terror crashing through her. No, I won't let that happen. Victoria's eyes turned icy cold, her mind racing with a dangerous plan. She knew she couldn't allow Daniel to live. She had to act first. A deadly call. Inside her private study, Victoria picked up her phone, dialing a number she reserved only for emergencies. The line rang. A deep, gravelly voice answered. What do you need, Mrs. Westwood? Victoria's voice dropped to a chilling whisper, each word laced with menace. I have a job for you. I need him gone. Who? She tossed a photo onto the table, Daniel Carter's face staring back. This one? There was a brief silence on the other end, then a low chuckle. How much? Victoria narrowed her eyes, her voice as cold as steel. Whatever it takes, just make sure he disappears. The man let out an amused snort. Consider it done. I'll notify you when it's finished. Victoria hung up, setting her phone down with deliberate care. A shiver ran through her, but her resolve remained unshaken. She had spent her entire life protecting Isabella's status and power. She would not let anyone threaten it, not even her husband's own son. A race against time. Victoria knew that Kimberly Westwood, her mother-in-law, had also learned the truth and wanted to accept Daniel as part of the family. That only made things worse. If Kimberly backed Daniel, Victoria would lose all control. She couldn't allow that to happen. She grabbed her phone again, dialing the hitman. Do it now. I don't want to wait any longer. The voice on the other end was calm, confident. Relax, Mrs. Westwood. It'll be done in a few days. Victoria gripped her phone tightly, her expression dark with determination. No one, not even Gabriel's son, would take what belonged to Isabella. She wouldn't allow it. Chapter 5. The Truth Revealed. Clara sat silently on the sofa, her hands clasped tightly together, her gaze lost in the view outside the window. Outside, New York was the same, bustling, noisy, constantly moving. But inside her, everything felt frozen in time. She had always known this moment would come. She had avoided the past for 30 years. She had protected her son from the truth for 30 years. But after that fateful encounter at the shopping mall, after Gabriel's phone call, she knew she could no longer keep Daniel in the dark. a secret buried for 30 years. Since the day she left the Westwood mansion, since the moment she looked at Gabriel one last time through the rain, Clara had sworn never to look back. I will forget everything. But fate was cruel. She had discovered she was pregnant shortly after leaving. For a fleeting moment, she had thought about telling Gabriel, but she knew by then he had married someone else. So she made another vow. She would never return. She would bury the past. She would bury that secret forever. And for 30 years, she had lived by that vow. She had raised Daniel alone, never once speaking of the man who had abandoned them. She had built a new life, a new future, one where Gabriel Westwood no longer existed. She had nurtured Daniel into the strong, intelligent, and kind man he was today. But now, Daniel had met him. They had stood face to face, and they had shaken hands. They had looked each other in the eye, without knowing they were father and son. Daniel deserved to know the truth. She couldn't hide it any longer. Fear of the unknown. But even as she acknowledged that the truth must come out, Clara was afraid. Afraid that Daniel would resent her for keeping this secret for so long. Afraid that Gabriel would try to take him away. Afraid that everything she had built would be turned upside down once again. She had no idea how Daniel would react. He had always been strong, independent, and proud. Would he accept the fact that his father was Gabriel Westwood? A man who had once abandoned his mother? A man who had never been there for him? A man who had missed 30 years of his life? Would he accept Gabriel or hate him, a mother's choice? Clara closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. She couldn't let fear hold her back forever. Daniel had the right to know. He had the right to choose for himself. She had kept this secret for 30 years. Tonight she would finally tell him the truth. The moment of truth. The sound of measured footsteps echoed down the hallway. Daniel Carter had just returned from a long day at work. His suit was still crisp, though his tie had been loosened, a picture of success and composure. "Mom, why are you still awake?" he asked, stepping into the living room. Clara took a deep breath. She looked at her son, the man she had raised, loved, and protected for 3 decades. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you." Her voice was low, heavy with emotion. Daniel frowned slightly. He had rarely seen his mother this serious. "Go ahead, Mom." Clara clenched her hands together, trying to steady herself. Her eyes held a mix of fear, sorrow, and resolve. And then finally, "Gabriel Westwood is your biological father." Daniel's world shatters. Daniel froze. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. His eyes widened, and his entire body felt paralyzed. "Mom, what are you saying?" Clara gazed at her son, her eyes filled with love, but also heavy with sorrow. "You are not the son of any other man. Your biological father is Gabriel Westwood." "No, that's impossible." Daniel shook his head, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Clara began to tell him everything. About her youthful love with Gabriel, about the years they spent together, about the Westwood family's opposition, and finally, about the day he abandoned her because she couldn't have children. The world around Daniel tilted, his reality unraveling. "He abandoned you, and now he wants to claim me?" His voice dropped, thick with unconcealed anger. Clara felt a sharp, aching pain in her chest. "I don't know if he truly wants to claim you, Daniel, but after that meeting at the shopping mall, I know he sensed something, and I believe you have the right to know the truth." Daniel let out a cold laugh, but his eyes darkened. "The truth? The truth is he discarded you and lived for 30 years without knowing I existed. And now he suddenly realizes, now he wants to reconnect?" Daniel's jaw clenched, his voice like steel. "It's too late. The choice is Daniel's." Clara let out a soft sigh. She knew her son was angry and hurt. She knew the pain of being abandoned. She knew the pain of feeling unwanted, because she had lived through it herself. Looking at Daniel, her voice was gentle, yet firm. "I won't force you to accept him. The decision is yours." Daniel's hands curled into tight fists as he stood abruptly. His eyes were cold and unyielding. "I don't need a father like him." His words rang through the silence, carrying the weight of deep pain. Without another word, he turned and walked to his room, leaving Clara sitting alone on the couch. Her heart ached. "I'm sorry, Daniel." The door closed, but the past had been unearthed, and the truth could no longer remain buried. Chapter 6. The Meeting Between Two Men. Gabriel stood at the entrance of a small cafe, staring at the door before him. Inside, David Sullivan was waiting, the man who had been by Clara's side for 30 years, the man who had been there for Daniel when Gabriel had not. For a brief moment, Gabriel hesitated. Then he stepped inside. David was already seated, calm and composed, as if he had known this meeting was inevitable. When Gabriel approached, their eyes met. An unspoken tension filled the space between them. Finally, Gabriel broke the silence. "Thank you." David raised an eyebrow, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Thank me?" His tone was calm, but there was a hint of amusement. "Yes." Gabriel gave a small nod. "Thank you for taking care of Clara and Daniel for the past 30 years. Thank you for doing what I couldn't." David was silent for a moment. Then he let out a soft chuckle. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for her." Gabriel didn't argue. He knew it was the truth. David took a sip of his coffee, his gaze distant. 30 years ago, you let her go." "I didn't." A story of strength and sacrifice. Gabriel remained quiet, listening. David wasn't looking for an explanation. He wasn't expecting an apology. He was simply telling the story of the woman they had both loved, each in their own way. Clara fought through everything alone. When she found out she was pregnant, she had nothing. No money, no family, no one by her side. David's voice softened slightly. "She thought about going back to you, Gabriel." Gabriel's heart tightened. But then she heard the news. You had married Victoria. And she understood that the door between you had closed forever. Gabriel clenched his jaw, his mind flashing back to the past. He remembered the day Victoria entered his life, not for love, but for duty. But he had never known that Clara had once thought of coming back. "Do you know what she did after leaving the Westwood family?" David continued. "She took whatever jobs she could just to survive. She worked as a waitress, washed dishes, did bookkeeping for a small company, anything to support her son. There were days when she didn't eat because she was afraid she wouldn't have enough money for Daniel's milk." Gabriel felt a crushing weight on his chest. There were nights she couldn't sleep, worrying about how to get through the next day. But she never broke. She never asked for help, not even when I offered to share her burden. She refused. Gabriel frowned. "Why?" David let out a small, bittersweet smile. "Because Clara never wanted to rely on anyone. Because she had already been abandoned once, and she refused to put herself in that position again. Because no matter how much I loved her, she was never truly mine." Gabriel's heart ached. How strong had Clara needed to be? How alone had she felt to refuse even a man who had always been willing to stand beside her? A mutual respect between two men. Gabriel inhaled deeply, then met David's gaze. "Thank you." This time, David wasn't surprised. He simply nodded, accepting the gratitude with quiet understanding. The two men sat there, not as rivals, but as two men who had both cared for the same woman. They both understood that the past couldn't be changed, but Gabriel knew one thing. He owed Clara an apology, and he owed Daniel a lifetime that he had missed. Today he had learned an important lesson. Love is not just about staying. Sometimes it is about sacrifice. Chapter 7. Victoria accelerates her plan. Kimberly strikes back. Victoria, the wife in name only, a hatred that had festered for decades. Victoria sat alone in the grand master bedroom of the Westwood mansion, where she had lived for over 30 years as Gabriel Westwood's wife. But in those 30 years, she had never once had his love. She was merely a shadow in his life, a wife in name only, a marriage built on duty, obligation, but never love. Victoria clenched her teeth, her eyes burning with hatred as she thought of Clara. She never truly left his heart. She remembered the nights Gabriel never came home, the moments when they sat next to each other, but his mind and heart were elsewhere. Even when Clara wasn't by his side, She haunted him every single day. She had endured it all. She had accepted this cold, empty marriage for only one reason. Isabella. Her daughter had to be the heir of the Westwood family. She could not let her 30 years of sacrifice be in vain. But then, Daniel Carter appeared. A bastard child Gabriel had never known about. And if Gabriel acknowledged Daniel, everything Victoria had fought for would be taken away. No, no, I won't let that happen. Her nails dug deep into her palms, her entire body trembling with rage. I've lived in the shadows for 30 years, but now I will not let Clara's son take everything. Isabella is the only rightful heir. Victoria faces Kimberly. Her secrets are exposed. But Victoria never expected that her plans had already been uncovered. Just as she was preparing to leave the mansion to meet the hitman, Kimberly was waiting in the living room, her sharp eyes cold as steel. Victoria froze, but quickly composed herself. Mother, I have something to take care of outside. Kimberly let out a cold smirk, then placed a file on the table. Victoria glanced at it, and her face turned pale. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Kimberly's voice was like ice. You planned to have Daniel killed, and you thought you could get away with it? Victoria's hands clenched into fists, the rage and hatred inside her exploding. So what? She spat out, her voice shaking. You always think you control everything, but you're wrong. I have lived as nothing but a shadow in this marriage for 30 years. Do you know what that feels like? Kimberly narrowed her eyes, but her voice remained calm. You lived with Gabriel for 30 years, but that was your choice. You married him for power, for status. Don't pretend you're a victim. Victoria let out a bitter laugh. Yes, I chose this marriage, but at least I gave Isabella a title. I endured a husband who never loved me, a man who only saw me as a duty, all so I could secure my daughter's future. And now Clara's bastard son comes back to take it all. Kimberly watched her coldly. Do you really think Daniel is to blame for your misery? Victoria's fury twisted into something darker, her eyes burning with a manic glint. Clara stole Gabriel from me, and now her son will steal everything from Isabella. Kimberly shook her head, her voice laced with contempt. You are truly pathetic, Victoria. You have spent your entire life fighting for something that was never yours to begin with. Victoria's face turned red with rage. She screamed, You forced Gabriel to leave Clara. Don't act like you're innocent. Kimberly's expression didn't change. Yes, I made a mistake. I took away my son's happiness. But at least I see my faults and want to fix them. She stepped closer, her presence commanding and unshakable. But you, Victoria, you are nothing but hatred and greed. You no longer have a place in this family. Victoria's breath hitched. For the first time, true fear crept into her eyes. Mother, you can't do this to me. Kimberly's voice was like a final sentence of exile. You are no longer worthy of being a Westwood. Get out. The fall of Victoria. The next morning, Victoria was officially expelled from the Westwood mansion. She tried to contact Gabriel, but he never answered. She tried to see Isabella, but her daughter was too shocked by the truth and refused to meet her. Now Victoria stood outside the gates, her eyes hollow, staring at the place that had once been her home. She had lost everything. The title of Mrs. Westwood, gone. The power she had fought for, gone. The family she had sacrificed everything for, gone. All those years of suffering, and this is my reward. She took one last look at the grand mansion, the place she had once ruled. Then she turned and walked into the night, with nothing left but hatred and bitterness. Victoria had lost, and she knew. This was the price she had to pay. Chapter 8, The Second Meeting, An Apology and Forgiveness. New York, a quiet cafe. The autumn air in New York was crisp, carrying a gentle chill. The golden hues of the setting sun streamed through the large windows, casting a soft glow over the quiet, elegant cafe. Clara Carter stepped inside, her expression calm, yet a storm of emotions brewed beneath the surface. At a corner table near the window, Gabriel Westwood was already waiting. He had chosen a secluded spot, quiet, understated, and private, a stark contrast to the man he once was. When Clara approached, Gabriel immediately stood, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. 30 years ago, they were husband and wife. 30 years later, they met again, as two strangers sharing a painful past. Thank you for coming. Gabriel's voice was hoarse with emotion. Clara gave a small nod before pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. Between them, silence stretched, a space filled with unspoken words, regrets, and unhealed wounds. A waiter arrived. Clara ordered a cup of tea while Gabriel already had a coffee in front of him, untouched, a long overdue apology. Gabriel stared at Clara for a long time before lowering his gaze, his fingers tightening around his cup. Finally, he spoke, his voice slow and raw. I'm sorry. There was no embellishment, no justification, just three simple words that carried the weight of a lifetime of regret. Clara lifted her eyes to him. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied the man before her. Gabriel had changed. He was no longer the proud, unyielding man who had once placed his family's legacy above all else. He no longer had the cold, detached gaze of a man who had walked away from her without hesitation. Instead, the man sitting before her now was filled with remorse, a man who had lost too much. Clara gave a small knowing smile, not out of joy, but of understanding and closure. I used to hate you. Her voice was soft, but unwaveringly honest. Gabriel's grip tightened. He already knew that. For years after I left, I lived with that hatred. I hated you for abandoning me just because I couldn't have children. I hated you for letting your mother control our lives, for choosing your family's honor over our happiness. Gabriel lowered his head, pain flashing in his eyes. I know, and I deserve that. Clara inhaled deeply, steadying herself before continuing. But then I realized hatred wouldn't change the past. It only trapped me in the pain I wanted so desperately to escape. And more importantly, Daniel needed a mother who was strong, not one who was drowning in resentment. Gabriel looked up, his gaze filled with gratitude and sorrow. Thank you for raising Daniel into the incredible man he is today. Clara smiled softly, pride flickering in her eyes as she spoke about their son. Daniel is a good man. He may be stronger than you think, but there are wounds I can never heal. He spent 30 years not knowing who his father was. He can't forgive you right away, but he needs time. Gabriel nodded, his voice quieter now. I don't expect immediate forgiveness. I only hope for a chance to make things right. Clara gazed at him, emotions swirling inside her. Once, she had loved this man more than anything. Once she had hated him with everything in her heart, but now she only felt peace, like two old friends. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. But this time, the silence was not filled with awkwardness or pain. It was acceptance. Clara finally broke the quiet, her voice gentle. How have you been all these years? Gabriel let out a weary chuckle, his eyes carrying a hint of exhaustion. I suppose you can already guess. I had everything money could buy, but I was never happy. I had a loveless marriage, a family that never truly felt like mine. I spent 30 years in a grand house, yet I felt nothing but emptiness. Clara nodded quietly. She understood, and for the first time in years, they simply talked. They revisited old memories, not with pain, but with appreciation. Once they had hated each other, but now they could sit together without resentment, because in the end, they both understood the past could not be changed, but they could choose how to move forward. A closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. As they stepped out of the cafe, Clara felt lighter than she had in years. Gabriel walked beside her, no longer the arrogant, distant man she once knew, but a man who had learned regret and was now trying to make things right. Before parting ways, Gabriel looked at Clara for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice steady. Whether you accept it or not, I will do everything I can to show Daniel that he was never abandoned. Clara smiled, a real, peaceful smile this time. Let him choose for himself. And then they parted, not as strangers, but as two people who had once loved deeply, suffered greatly, and finally found forgiveness. Chapter 9, The Meeting Between Father and Son, Atonement. That afternoon, the New York sky was gray, mirroring the heavy atmosphere of those about to confront their past. Inside a private meeting room in an upscale restaurant, the silence was so profound that even the ticking of the wall clock felt deafening. Daniel Carter entered, tall, composed, exuding an air of quiet authority. He was not a child seeking a father's love. He was the CEO of Carter Tech, a self-made man who had never needed anyone to lift him up. Inside, Gabriel Westwood and Kimberly Westwood were already waiting. Clara was there too, but she chose to sit quietly at a distance, allowing the three of them the space they needed. Daniel's gaze swept across the room, pausing on Gabriel, before settling on the grandmother he had never known. Kimberly studied her grandson for a long moment, her eyes filled with complicated emotions, regret, sorrow, and a quiet sense of pride. "You look so much like your father when he was young." Her voice was steady but genuine. Daniel said nothing, his expression unreadable. Kimberly hesitated, then lowered her voice, her hand trembling slightly as she rested it on the table. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make amends." Daniel let out a soft, bitter laugh, his sharp gaze unyielding. "Amends?" He leaned forward slightly, his tone calm yet cutting. "What could you possibly offer to make up for 30 years of never even knowing I existed?" Kimberly pressed her lips together, knowing he was right. For 30 years, she had never once considered that she might have a grandson. Not until the truth was forced upon her did she realize that she had robbed not just her son of happiness, but her grandson of a childhood with his family. Gabriel's apology. Gabriel took a deep breath before finally speaking. "Daniel, I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make things right." Daniel turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Dad?" The word left his lips with a sharp, bitter smile. "Do you think a simple apology is enough to erase 30 years of your absence? Do you think I spent my entire life waiting for you to show up?" Gabriel felt a sharp pain in his chest, but he didn't argue. Everything Daniel said was true. He hadn't been there when his son needed a father. He hadn't been there when Clara had to raise their child alone, facing hardships he couldn't even imagine. He had lost the right to call himself Daniel's father the moment he had turned his back on Clara. Daniel's voice lowered, his gaze piercing through Gabriel's. "The person you should be apologizing to isn't me. It's my mother." The room fell into silence. Chapter 9. The apology that mattered most. Clara stiffened. She hadn't expected Daniel to say that. She had assumed that today's meeting was meant for Gabriel and Kimberly to speak with their son. But now, she realized that Daniel had never forgotten what she had endured. Kimberly turned to look at Clara. Then, with deliberate steps, she walked toward her. Taking a deep breath, she bowed her head. "Clara, I was wrong. 30 years ago, I was cruel. I forced you to leave. I saw you as unworthy of the Westwood family, and I was wrong. It was I who pushed my son to make the wrong choice. And because of me, my grandson grew up without a real family. I'm sorry." Clara froze. She had never imagined that a woman as powerful as Kimberly Westwood would one day lower herself to apologize. Gabriel too apologized once more. But as Clara stood before their sincere remorse, she realized that hatred was no longer necessary. A long silence, and a new beginning. Daniel watched everything, his face still unreadable. But in his eyes there was a flicker of hesitation. He wasn't someone who forgave easily, but he couldn't deny that for the first time, they were genuinely remorseful. "Mom," Daniel spoke. Clara smiled softly, placing a reassuring hand over his. "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, but sometimes it helps us move forward." No one spoke after that, but in that moment they all knew this was a new beginning. The wounds of the past were still there, but they were no longer barriers. They had chosen to face them, together. Chapter 10. Time heals all wounds. Daniel and Gabriel, a distance that no longer divides. In the days following their emotional meeting, Daniel Carter still kept his distance from Gabriel Westwood. He couldn't immediately accept a father who had been absent for 30 years. But even if he never admitted it, something had shifted. Daniel still met Gabriel in business meetings between their two companies. They still spoke as professionals. But the cold, indifferent gaze Daniel once held for Gabriel was gone. At times, during business dinners or long negotiations, Gabriel would unconsciously watch his son. Daniel was so much like him, not just in appearance, but in his calm demeanor, his decisiveness, the way he commanded a room. "I may not have been there while you grew up, but you became an incredible man anyway." Gabriel had once told him that. Daniel hadn't responded at the time, but deep down, he knew. It was the truth. One evening, after they coincidentally walked out of a meeting together, Gabriel hesitated before asking, "Would you have time for dinner sometime?" Daniel paused, thought for a moment. Then he nodded, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as a chance for them to finally begin healing. Clara and David, a love that came late but was complete. The sun was setting, painting the New York sky in hues of gold and crimson. The park where Daniel had once played as a child remained unchanged, filled with laughter, the soft rustling of autumn leaves, and the warmth of passing memories. Clara Carter sat on an old bench, her hands clasped together, watching people pass by. But in reality, she wasn't looking at anything at all. Her mind drifted to the past. 30 years. A third of her life spent carrying burdens, sacrificing, shielding her son from pain. 30 years. She had never allowed herself to love, never allowed herself to be weak, never trusted anyone enough to lean on them, because deep down she was still that woman who had once been abandoned. David, the man who never left. For 30 years, there was one person who had always been there. David Sullivan. He was there when she was at her lowest. On the days after Daniel was born, when she had nothing but desperation, David appeared. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge her. He simply handed her an envelope with enough money for baby formula, ensuring that her son wouldn't go hungry. He was there as she raised Daniel alone. On nights when she stayed awake, restless with worry, David would knock on her door, bringing food and a quiet, comforting presence. On the days when she thought she couldn't keep going, David never tried to tell her it would be okay. He simply sat beside her, steady as a rock. And when she thought that no one could ever love her again, David proved her wrong. He never demanded anything from her, never pressured her to love him back. He simply stayed, patient, gentle, waiting. The moment she let go of the past, Clara took a deep breath and turned to David. He was the same as always, calm, steadfast, unwavering, a pillar of strength that had stood beside her for 3 decades, even when she never truly noticed. And in that moment, she realized it was never Gabriel. It was never anyone else. David had been the one who stayed. David had been the one who saw her struggles, her strength, her pain, and still remained. Her hands trembled slightly, but for the first time, she reached out first. David stilled, his eyes widening in surprise. Then in the next moment, he took her hand, gripping it firmly, as if he had been waiting for this all along. Clara smiled, a real, genuine smile, the first in years. "I've spent too long realizing this, but I don't want to waste any more time." David was silent, as if trying to believe that this moment was real. Then he smiled too, not just with happiness, but with the quiet understanding of a man who had waited a lifetime. "I've always been waiting for you." A cool autumn breeze swept through the park, carrying the scent of crisp leaves and new beginnings. For the first time, Clara felt at peace. 30 years. She had spent 30 years searching for a place to belong, and all along, it had always been right beside her. Today, she was finally ready to let go of the past, and ready to love again, a family legacy rewritten. In the Westwood estate, another chapter was coming to a close. Kimberly Westwood offered Daniel the full inheritance of the family empire, but Daniel refused to take it all. Instead, he agreed to keep a significant stake in Westwood Enterprises. Not to control it, not to replace Isabella, but to ensure that no one else would be manipulated by the family name. This gave Isabella the choice to carve her own path, without the burden of expectation. At first, Kimberly wasn't pleased, but in the end, she accepted Daniel's decision. As Daniel walked out of the final family meeting, he turned to Clara and said, I don't need anything from them, but I won't let this family control anyone else again. Clara smiled, feeling lighter than ever. Her son had remained the man she raised, a man who never let greed consume him, a man with integrity and his own sense of justice. Gabriel stood nearby, watching Daniel with pride swelling in his chest. Daniel, you may not carry the Westwood name, but you are the greatest regret of my life. Daniel didn't reply, but for a long moment he simply looked at his father. Perhaps in that silence, there was an unspoken forgiveness. Inside the Westwood mansion, Kimberly sat alone, gazing at the family portrait hanging on the wall. She exhaled softly, her fingers lightly brushing against the frame. Finally, this family has changed. She smiled, a smile laced with regret, but also acceptance. Final happiness. After everything, each person found their own path. Daniel continued to lead Carter Tech, driving it to greater heights than ever before. Clara finally allowed herself to find peace, embracing the love of David, the man who had stood by her side for 3 decades. Gabriel spent the rest of his life atoning for his mistakes, trying to make up for lost time with his son. Isabella was given the freedom to choose her own future, without the weight of the family name dictating her path. All resentment had been set aside, and at last the family found peace. They looked ahead, toward a future free from the mistakes of the past. A gathering of new beginnings. A few months later, at a small garden party at Clara's home, everyone gathered together. Daniel sat across from Gabriel and Kimberly. There were no longer cold stares or distant expressions. Even Isabella, Gabriel's daughter with Victoria, was there. Though still shy, she made an effort to connect with her newfound half-brother. Clara stood beside David, her gaze filled with contentment and serenity. Finally, they had all learned to let go of the past and embrace the future. The final moment. Later that evening, Daniel stood on the balcony, overlooking the garden where his family conversed and laughed together. Gabriel approached, stopping beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Only the sound of the gentle evening breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. Do you regret it? Gabriel took a deep breath, his voice soft but unwavering. Yes, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. Daniel didn't respond right away, but this time, his eyes were no longer filled with coldness. He glanced toward Clara, David, and the others in the garden. The past can't be changed, Daniel spoke slowly, but at least we can try to make the future better. Gabriel nodded, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. Thank you. Daniel didn't reply, only looking out into the distance. The pain of the past had finally been put to rest. A new chapter had begun, and together, they stepped forward. Thank you for following this story. Let us know what you thought, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and powerful stories. Leave a comment. Share this story with others. Stay tuned for the next one.